Hello, we would like to begin with the land acknowledgement. By acknowledging that the University of Illinois Chicago resides on traditional territories of the Three Fires people, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Bodwodmi, purchased after 2.5 years of open warfare, decades of violent encroachment, and defeat of a pan-Indian movement to keep settlers out of the Great Lakes region at the Treaty of Chicago in 1821, receiving their final payment before moving westward in 1835. The area was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for more than a dozen Native tribes. The state of Illinois is currently home to more than 75,000 tribal members, and the Chicagoland area is currently home to one of the largest and most diverse urban Native communities in the US. Illinois is also the territory of the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Anoka, Menominee, Sac, Fox, and their descendants. By making a land acknowledgement, we recognize that Indigenous peoples are the traditional stewards of the land that we now occupy, living here long before Chicago was a city and still thriving here today. As we work, live, and play on these territories, we must ask what we can do to right the historic wrongs of colonization and state violence and support Indigenous communities' struggles for self-determination and sovereignty. My name is Aguirre, and I'm the president of the Urban Planning and Policy Student Association. I welcome you to the 12th Annual Urban Innovation Symposium, Reshaping the Normal. The symposium is presented by the student organizations in UIC's College of Urban Planning and Public Affairs, the Latinx Planning Organization for Development, Education, and Regeneration, ALPODER, Women in Planning and Public Affairs, WPPA, Society for Black Urban Planners, ESPA, and Urban Planning and Policy Student Association, UPSA. The event would not have been possible without the symposium committee members, including Hamali Shingal, Molly Clark, Irene Henry, Chelsea Moore, and Carlos Velasco, and financial support from CUPPA's Urban Planning and Policy Program. This two-day symposium seeks to offer reflective space for emerging planners and professionals. We encourage each of you to engage with the theme Reshaping the Normal, as each panel considers what is deemed as normal within planning and beyond. Now, without further ado, Samantha Lenoch, representing Women in Planning and Public Affairs, will begin with our first panel.
Thank you for your introduction, Aguirre. My name is Samantha Lenoch, and I am on the board of the Women in Planning and Public Affairs at UIC. Welcome to our panel built by women reclaiming public spaces. In this panel, we are joined by three very influential change makers in Chicago, Audrey Wennink, Tonika Johnson, and Paola Aguirre. In our discussion this afternoon, we will focus on strategies that were done as a response to COVID-19's impact on our cities and public spaces, and specifically how they can generate gender equity and inequity. Conversely, we will explore how people are reclaiming public spaces and see how planners are adapting to this increasing need and how the government is taking action. I will give a biography of our panelists, of our three fantastic panelists. They have a long list of accomplishments, but I'll just keep their bios short to give us time for our conversation. First, we're joined by Audrey Wennink, who is the Director of Transportation with the Metropolitan Planning Council in Chicago, where she leads transportation research and advocacy efforts for pursuing sustainable funding for transportation in Illinois, integration of performance-based planning methods, and developing efforts to boost transportation equity. Next, we have social justice artist Tonika Johnson, who is the co-founder of the Englewood Arts Collective and Resident Association of Great Englewood, or RAGE. She is also the founder of the Folded Map Project. Within her artistic practice, Tonika explores urban segregation and documents the nuance and richness of the Black community. Next, we have Paola Aguirre, who is the founder of Borderless Studio, an urban design and research practice based in Chicago. Paola is trained as an architect and urban designer with professional experience working with government, universities, and architecture and urban design firms, both in Mexico and Chicago, and in the United States. Now we will get on to our questions. The WPPA board has developed a set of questions for our panelists. So for the audience, if you would like to ask a question, if you wouldn't mind, please waiting till the end of our discussion. Otherwise, feel free to pop a question in the chat and I will begin answering your questions within the last 10 or 15 minutes of our panel. So to begin, what is the value or role of placemaking within your work? Audrey, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, my comments, as you may guess, will tend to be coming from a perspective of transportation and the public spaces that have been dedicated to transportation. We certainly live in an auto-centric society, and so trying to shift how we use those transportation public spaces for other modes of transportation is a very important focus. Placemaking in transportation, I think what comes to mind for me the most is how it supports walkability, creates community and supports walkability. And I can go on and on about walkability. Walking is the most basic form of transportation, and we frequently forget that. That's how people moved in societies for the entire history of the world until about 100 years ago. There's so many benefits of making a place attractive for walking and doing good placemaking. And people need for people to want to walk, a place does have to be appealing. But the benefit of walkability is that it's not only the most basic form of transportation that connects to everything else, but it's free. So it's affordability of our transportation and public spaces is very important. It's healthy. Walkability is an indicator of longevity. And it's the easiest exercise to integrate into daily life. So if you live in a walkable place, you are likely to be more healthy. Obviously, zero emissions because of climate change. That's a very important factor. Providing access to transit, placemaking with transportation, enabling people of all ages and abilities to have independent mobility is really important. Placemaking with respect to transportation and walkability has a major role in creating economically vibrant areas. And walkability also supports efficient land uses. So walkable communities can support more dense land uses, more environmentally friendly land uses, more affordable housing can be possible in those areas. So that's my that's my focus right now is walkability, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
Excellent, thank you so much. Paola, would you mind answering what value or role you think placemaking occurs within your work?
Thank you. Yes, I always think of, how each project can give us an opportunity and excuse to build collective things. So collaboration, placemaking, placekeeping, how these projects are an excuse and an opportunity to bring us together to work towards something that it's greater, it's not individual, but it's collective. So collective care, collective building, collective experiences. I was trained as an architect where you are the sole star of this thing. No, I don't think so. You need just so much richness and wealth comes from, brainstorming with people that are brilliant and have other ideas and bring other experiences to the table. So I think oftentimes, I spend a lot of time just asking questions and listening, and in the back of my head all these ideas are building and emerging, but I always elevate or put as a priority, how do we build together? How do we collectively do this thing together? For me, that's the value that a lot of the design processes that we put forward are really seeking to build things in a collective way.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Now, Tonika, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, Paola is right with everything that she says she aims to do, because she's my dear friend and partner in art. And she's definitely a great interpreter of ideas. So, just collaborating with her on so many of the placemaking activities that I do has helped me be able to kind of articulate why that's important to me. And ultimately, it's rooted in the fact that, you know, I am from a neighborhood, Greater Englewood, that is often what I call bullied in the media. And for me, the placemaking is most important to help kind of like remove the embarrassment of what we have gone through in this neighborhood. Oftentimes, especially growing up as a young Black girl, teenager, telling people where you live, and then having to deal with learning all of the reactions that come with that. And so it was really important for me to create opportunities for the spaces in our neighborhood that has been disinvested in and neglected, to kind of like exalt them to what they mean to us, whether it's a vacant lot that had an existing building, or a closed school, or you know, my project Folded Map, really using the built environment to help not only those within Greater Englewood, but the city as a whole, to kind of understand how these spaces and geographies like influence or impact our lives today, and to really help change the narrative of what everyone has kind of been told, not only about Greater Englewood, but just the lives of Black people in Chicago. There's like a narrative of, because of the disinvestment in our neighborhood, there's a misperception that we migrated to this city poor, and as a result, our neighborhoods look the way that it is, when that is not the truth. That's just the furthest from the truth. So placemaking really helps provide an opportunity for others and people to come together and learn truth and heal, as well as offer an opportunity to kind of celebrate history that has been intentionally kind of ignored and hidden.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And thank you all so much for sharing your areas of interest and your expertise. Going off of this question, I just want to ask now, thinking about community cohesion and community building, what are some ways or tactics to build stronger communities and strengthen this notion of community cohesion? Audrey, if you'd like to start, please.
Yeah, I really like what both Paola and Tonika have said about collaboration. I think that's hugely important. I think having community assets that reflect community culture is really important in terms of you know, differentiating neighborhoods and having you know, we don't want everything to look the same in terms of our infrastructure. We want to have art and culture be represented in our different neighborhoods, while at the same time providing connections between communities so people can move about and access opportunity. So I think certainly from a transportation perspective, we are thinking only recently more about how transportation spaces and public spaces can provide community cohesion. We've seen that a little bit in the COVID era, where there's been repurposing of public spaces and people getting the experience of what that can be like, and how you can build a community by just being together and being in places together, in shared spaces, and even moving about together. Like we were talking in that before we came on as a group about group bike rides, and just shared experiences, and infusing joy into those shared experiences can really bring community cohesion together. So I'll stop there.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Thank you. Paola, would you, or excuse me, Tonika, would you like to?
Ooh.
Paola or Tonika?
You can go, Paola, if you want to.
Whoever's ready.
I just accidentally unmuted.
I thought you were ready.
Go for it.
Okay. Well, you know, I love the community building, not only just the placemaking events or moments, but really the community that's built around the process of creating those moments and events. Because, you know, Paola and I working together, we have definitely introduced our networks to each other, and the cross collaboration and the access to a variety of resources that our networks continue to give each other is, you know, really kind of like the gold of it, because there are artists who I'm in community with that now they have been introduced to not only just Paola, but the industry and sector that she represents. It allows them to think differently about projects that they have. You know, I have artist friends who, you know, are asking about fabricators now. That's not, that's definitely not anything they thought or that they understood or thought that they could have access to. You know, the resources that are shared amongst different communities and industries. Like I really love that aspect of the community building and what you can learn as an individual, regardless of what medium or industry you kind of represent or work within. And, you know, just the introduction of so many people that are in Paola's world has helped me even think about projects larger than what, you know, myself as a photographer or, you know, a longtime fanatic of just maps in Chicago, having access to individuals that can help you actualize projects can expand, you know, your vision even more. And so I just really love that community building part. Like I love projects that include, you know, more than myself, which is why I joke and say, you know, I love photography, but I think I'm going beyond it now because photography is such a singular experience, but, you know, depending upon what you do, you're engaging with your subject. But sometimes, you know, street photography, which is what I primarily did, you didn't necessarily have to, but because of my journalism background, I loved engaging with the people that I photographed, and that has just expanded. So I really love projects that include like partnerships and groups.
Definitely. Thank you.
I would just add to that. You know, what are the things that that I'm interested in? You know, exercises of community building are learning together. I think when we learn together, it's different that I'm learning on my own and you're learning over here. So we have different levels of understanding of issues or things. When we create resources to learn together about something is really powerful. So I feel like a lot of the work that we do and, you know, in collaborating projects such as Folded Map, also in Equity for Sale now, is doing that. Like, how can we all learn together? And we're just creating, you know, this, we're helping to tell that story in a way that everyone can access it in different ways. But, you know, we're sharing moments, creating spaces for shared learning. And I think that's something that it's incredibly powerful. All the work that we've been doing at one of the closed schools in Brownsville at Overton has been telling over and over the story of a couple of things. One, Anthony Overton, number one, what an important character in history. And we don't talk about him enough, right? Like civic leader, business leader, of the early 20th century. You see monuments about other folks, like let's celebrate, leadership in the Black community. So we keep talking about him, and young people are learning about him because there's nowhere else to talk about this history. Two, we talked about why schools closed. Like, why is this the tip of the iceberg of a larger inequity issue or segregation and racism? So, the project and the programs and the activities are an excuse to share knowledge and share learning and share stories. So that's why I'm really fascinated by this aspect of narrative shaping. We have the power of doing that. And, it's at the reach of each one of us. How do we insert that narrative shaping in each one of these projects? The bike rides that Audrey is talking about, they're incredibly powerful because they reconnect with, why don't we do this? Let's ask ourselves why, bike rides in neighborhoods are not a thing, or, they're only a part of the culture of certain groups, or I really love unpacking and, using every activity and project as an opportunity to reflect, and to think of ways in which we can tell the stories that we want to tell, not the stories that are being told and dominating other media.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you all so much. Moving on, I heard a lot about intersecting work with a lot of people in different fields or with different talents. So for my next question, I'm wondering, why do you think artists are so important in placemaking and creating spaces?
Yeah, I can go first on that one. I mean, certainly you want to create places where people want to be and where people feel safe, where that are beautiful. And so art is, a part of all of that. We see, if you notice when you're moving about the city, how much more enjoyable it is to walk in places where there are murals. Certain parts of our city have such great murals, and that makes walking and moving about really enjoyable. The role of public art, it may be subconscious, but those things are all making you want to walk and be in a place. We see that the CTA has a program where it integrates original art into each of its stations, or many of its stations, and that's part of the whole package of making transit stations and station areas into places where people want to be. There's also there's a program in Chicago called Elevated, which is working on equitable transit-oriented development, and it's very much leading with art and leading with communities and community members who are identifying how to make station areas positive and relevant places to communities. And that group, it's been really impressive how even when they have meetings with urban planners, they'll have a poem read or a song at the beginning of the meeting, which is something that I had, is not common in planning meetings, but it just creates a whole different tone of collaboration and appreciation and cultural appreciation. And then one other thing I'll just mention really quickly that I think is super cool, and I hope we see more of it, is there has been starting to be a trend of embedding artists in departments of transportation. Smart Growth America has been supporting this in the national level. We don't have an example of it here in Chicago, but like the Minnesota Department of Transportation has an artist on staff and who's thinking about how to integrate art into projects. And I think that's just super cool, and I hope we'll see more of that.
Great, thank you so much. Tonika, why do you think artists are important in building places? I know this is probably a given for you, but
I actually want Paola to take this one first while I'm still thinking. I'm like, why are we so important? So, I have a few things, I'm tossing around in my head, but until I figure it out, so I won't spend too much time rambling, I'm gonna We're gonna
We
give it
can
to
ramble. We can ramble together.
you. Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. Well, no, that's partially true. I would say, I'm gonna be very honest with y'all. I'm trained as an architect. My experience is in urban design. I practice a lot of urban planning. I'm an imposter artist. I navigate all this world. But what had me in
Creative thinker, that's what you are, though.
cultural producers, creative things. I think we're like expanding now these roles and titles and like definitions of how I practice. That's why my practice is called Borderless, because I don't believe what I have to give to communities can be put in a box or in a bucket. So I don't operate that way. And just is my instinct to like think of creativity in multiple ways, right? Whereas it's spatial, where is it graphic, where is it built environment, where is it designer process. So the one thing that inspires me of what Audrey just mentioned is that, I'm still sitting conversations where, there are the planners and, and designers and architects and like, let's make things pretty. Let's bring the artists. Now it's time to make things pretty or bring the designer. And it's just infuriating, right? Because our capacity is not only like putting color and like, shaping sculptures or, shaping buildings, but like our creative capacity goes beyond that. And I think for me that it's an undervalued and understated. And, how artists have this creative capacity. And I think many people have that creative capacity. We're just, I think the culture of work generally in practice, professionalization puts us in these little buckets in which like you can only do that. But I think we're all kind of creative artists. Exercise that is a muscle, right? Creativity is a muscle. So we exercise that more often. But I often think, like what a great multidisciplinary team what greatness could come from multidisciplinary teams. And I was just referencing Tonika's dream team for the inequity for sale. It's amazing. Like research is a dream team. It's truly a dream team. Like research, graphic designer, journalism, like fabrication. Like the spectrum of the project is so layered and so incredible. And I think that's why we get along so well, because we think of like these projects are so expensive and expansive, not expensive, but they're also that they cannot be addressed and tackled by one expertise. It's the need for like this multidisciplinary approach. I really believe that's where 21st century is bringing us to. And it used to be that way. I feel like 20th century was like, keep everyone in their bucket. So there's more control. So I think creativity at the forefront of many efforts is going to bring, so many amazing outcomes.
No, I agree. And speaking from the artist perspective, why my collaborations have been so meaningful to me is because recently as well, because I was operating as primarily a photographer. However, that medium, I knew in the back of my mind, I knew it wasn't the only expression of ideas that I had, but it was the one I was introduced to as a teenager. It was the one I, had been leaning on as a hobby, and then an eventual job, freelance when I wanted. But I knew that there were limitations to photography for me in regards to a lot of the larger concepts I wanted to present to the public. And, quite frankly, being a photographer, trying to have conversations 10 years ago, 7 years ago about segregation, the way in which I was spoken to or invited into conversations was just purely, oh, you can come document, you can come take some photos. And I'm just like, no, I have like a whole nother idea. And it wasn't until I was able to share these ideas with other people, Paola being one of them, who valued the creative thinking of me as an artist, not just me as a photographer, that I was able to become confident enough to see the value of artists in these particular spaces. I never viewed myself as like an urban planner, but I definitely had opinions. I didn't grow up knowing that I was interested in GIS, but I loved mapping. So, you know, all of these things can be embodied in an individual artist, and oftentimes maybe the medium that we're exposed to at you know, an early age is the box that people want to keep us in. But we do offer beyond our mediums that we practice, just the way in which we think. You know, we approach and think about issues, ways to present them or deliver them to the public, you know, differently, creatively. And, you know, we definitely have a different lens that can offer a lot to a variety of industries, and I think that, or sectors, and I think that is kind of demonstrated in my folded map project, because I'm still learning to this day, like how it resonates with different sectors, from urban planning to real estate to GIS to political to, you know, and all of that's encapsulated in what I just love to say, it's the art project, y'all. You know, and that's to some, you know, that could be me minimizing it, but I'm like, no, it's okay. It's, you know, referring to something as an art project is not minimizing it, only if you think that way. It's an art project that includes a different kind of analyzation, a presentation of an issue, a study. So yeah, I think it's just great that art is now being, or the artistic creative thinking is now being included in a lot of different sectors. Like they are uplifting it enough to the point where it can be a seat at the table in these discussions. And you know, I think it's great that a lot of individuals in different sectors understood that before now, you know, just some of them, you know, Paola being one of them, Audrey being another, who understood the value of including artists at the table, you know, which is why we clicked, because I definitely did not feel like I clicked with a lot of other sectors prior to, I would just say, folded map. I was only spoken to as a photographer. Yes, you can take pictures of this. And I'm like, I got some thoughts too. I want to share them. The end.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much for bringing in your experiences, whether that be work, personal hobbies, but then also bringing in the importance of art in our public space to really inspire people and have people feel welcome to be in certain places. Now shifting a little bit, thinking more about the pandemic and the emergencies we have seen. Do you see a difference between pre-pandemic, being in a public space, pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic, and the use of public spaces and the importance people have placed on public spaces? But also, do you see a trajectory moving forward for how we will begin to treat our public spaces, or how we have treated our public spaces?
Yeah, I can start with that one. I mean, we definitely, I mean, I would say yes, there's a difference, especially if you think about, again, transportation, you know, being on the transit system, that's a public space. Being in streets, that's a public space. Being in plazas, that's a public space. People had the opportunity during COVID in many regions to participate in kind of these street closures and these shared streets, which we did have in Chicago. There were so we were learning over this long journey with COVID. The first year was the shared streets, where it was sort of limit car traffic, and let people walk and bike in the same traffic. And then it got a little bit more formalized the next year in terms of street closures. In my neighborhood, we closed down a whole street every 3 days out of 7, every weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, for like 12 times last summer. And people had the experience of walking down a street with no cars, for extended time, and kids playing in the street, and just having it be a different type of place, dining in the street, all that, but for an extended amount of time. And then there are places in downtown Chicago, at least, that are like still closed down. Clark Street has a whole block that's been closed down for like 2 years now. And they just wanted to keep it that way because people saw the value of it. And so we've also seen in other global cities, there was an announcement last week that Paris is going to shut down the core of its urban center to cars within 2 years. They made some big, Paris and Milan made very big announcements shortly after COVID happened that they were going to drastically increase biking infrastructure and reduce space for cars. So there's been a shift away from space for cars in streets and shifting it to bicycles and pedestrians, which is positive. But that's always a battle, and that will continue to be a battle. And I think we all hope that people have had that experience and will want more of that. And everybody, residents, businesses, dining, everyone's seen the value of it, but it takes courage to fight against our auto-oriented society, to make those permanent changes and shift the way space is used in the future, and make it more equitable and more community oriented and safer and all those good things.
Definitely, thank you. Tonika, do you have any thoughts about pre versus post pandemic public spaces and how we're moving forward after we've seen the shift of COVID-19's impacts?
Yeah, I think we're all collectively on the same page of like valuing our public spaces, our outdoor public spaces more. If there was a difference in how different people, communities valued it, I think now we all like, yes, we see the beauty and the reason and the value of outdoor public spaces, but to also layer that to everything else that the pandemic helped expose, which is the inequity and the disinvestment, and how that has contributed to different people having access to quality public spaces, or looking at the public spaces that exist in certain neighborhoods. And I think the pandemic, as with everything else, it really just put a spotlight on the inequities and really demonstrated how and why, we can't unify to collectively value something like public spaces is because of all of these inequities. It's kind of hard to really advocate for bike lanes in a neighborhood like Greater Englewood, even though we bike. A lot of Black boys that have been building bikes their whole little life. It's a bike community. However, we're in need of so much other stuff that, places such a huge importance on having a car, because we don't have access to all of the other amenities that, by bike lanes, that's not going to be high on our list. However, it does not mean that, in a perfect world, we would want that, but we want everything else. Like, okay, we can have bike lanes, but where we going to go? We going to bike to where? We still need stores, restaurants, and upgraded parks to bike to. So I think that the pandemic has really showed how unleveled all of this is. and how that really influences how different populations, can advocate for certain things. Because if you have an inaccessibility and inequity, then, you're going to prioritize issues differently. So, but I think now we all understand the beauty and value of a public park and access to be able to walk to a train. Like, we all understand how necessary that is to just mental health as well, dealing with something like a pandemic. Like, you just have to get outdoors.
And I can just mention, I love this conversation so much because it's making me remember things that are in the pipeline for our studio. I love that Tonika brought up parks. I love that Audrey brought up like transit stations as social infrastructure, public infrastructure. I've been thinking a lot about public schools, and the grounds of schools, right, became what a great asset to have. They are also strategically located. They're usually in the hearts of neighborhoods. So if you cannot go to a big park that is in your neighborhood, you should definitely have walkable access to where your closest public school is. And the way that we have, created these barriers, like public schools grounds are not necessarily accessible to the community. I've been thinking a lot about that. The city of Boston, city of Cambridge, and Somerville on the East Coast have their grounds accessible to the community. And the reason I've been reflecting a lot about this is because, the need for access to any kind of, smaller scale community space in neighborhoods, it's a must. We cannot all walk 20 minutes, 30 minutes to the next big park. So, the one of the things that we did during the 2020 summer was working in a project on the grounds of Overton Elementary. Actually, a project that was supported by Elevated Chicago that Audrey mentioned. I just put the link in the chat in case you're curious. But we were able to, convene and work on this project because it was outdoors for the most part. So, the value, a lot of these places, specifically schools, yes, the buildings are great for certain programs, right? But the grounds, the school grounds, are such an invaluable opportunity for hosting whatever you can think about. So I've been reflecting on, pandemic really shed the light on the inequity and accessibility to open spaces, to public spaces. Not everyone has beautiful streets to take a stroll, street trees. Don't even talk about it in South Side or West Side, where the tree canopy is, probably 30% less or more than North Side neighborhoods. But can we think of other spaces that are already there, and how can we think of ways of opening and making them accessible? And that's what it's been the back of my head lately, how can already built infrastructure can become more accessible, like schools.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for bringing all of these examples and resources for rethinking our public spaces. I want to dedicate some time for audience questions if you all have any. If you feel comfortable, the audience can feel free to unmute yourself and ask our panelists some questions, or if you'd rather type them in the chat and I will read them off. While we wait, just because there are some students in this panel right now in our audience, I'm just curious if you all have any advice for emerging planners or advocates or activists that our audience can take with them.
I guess I would say something that could be a thread throughout any discipline. When I talk to students, because I'm a former teaching artist, and I enjoy doing critique sessions with student photographers. And what I tell them is, yes, cultural producers, yes, Paola. I tell them, don't try to like search for a project, you know, don't try to figure that out. You do better trying to figure out your own personal, not only passion, but questions that you might want to ask yourself and understand more about yourself, like really taking some time to do some personal reflection, because in doing that, you discover a lot of things about yourself. One, what your passions are, where your strengths are, where there's room for growth, and then you'll be able to kind of put that all together to influence whatever discipline you're in. But it really is helpful to do some personal reflection, so you can understand maybe some of the blinders that your personal lived experience has contributed you to having, that could influence how you do whatever it is that you do. And I think that applies to a lot of different sectors and mediums, and especially with photography, just as an example. I tell students, you know, your photography and what you photograph actually says more about you as an artist and a photographer than it does about your subject. You know, that's why portfolios are important, because you get to see your particular viewpoint and your perspective laid out in front of you. And sometimes that's the only way people can see other things they're not seeing. And that can really either hinder the work that you do, regardless if it's photography, if it's urban planning. Like, you really do need to think about how your lived experience contributes to how you see things today. Because as a result of Folded Map, I've been talking to young urban planners, and you know, we've had the conversation of the homogenous lived experience they've had, how it does spill over into them not seeing things that they would like to be able to see and contribute to certain projects or plans. And I think we all need to just do that, because it does translate into the work we do, whether that's even medical, you know. Just taking some personal reflection and allowing yourself to learn and be corrected. Learn to be corrected.
Definitely, thank you.
I think that question in the chat is really interesting, and I want to make space for that too.
Right, thank you. Michaela asked this semester, her class is working on a community plan for Greater Englewood. Since this talk is hosted by the Woman in Planning and Public Affairs, she's wondering how public spaces and placemaking can better support women, specifically in Englewood, but also in every community.
One, safety. I mean, before you even get to creating a space, you have to address safety. All people want safety, but it's even that much more important for youth, and specifically, not even specifically, I can't really even make any distinction, just youth, girls and boys. So addressing that, finding ways that the built environment can be adjusted, manipulated to encourage gatherings and spaces that can help remove the opportunity of certain kinds of crimes to happen. So an example is, we have a lot of vacant lots and abandoned homes in Greater Englewood. That contributes to crime, because if you're a crime-involved person, you're going to want to go to the best location to do your crime. And so Greater Englewood has a lot of vacant lots and homes. So that means less eyes are on you if you're crime involved. That means you don't have a lot of people paying attention who could call the police. So just considering all of those factors is critical to understanding placemaking specific to women and youth in Greater Englewood. And also knowing that there's not a lot of brick and mortar spaces for gathering. So just being aware of that. So finding a way to create the things that are missing, or the things that can encourage safety, like on blocks that have vacant homes and vacant lots, but also have people who still live on those blocks as well. Something simple as creating or installing creative lighting, things like that. I think that needs to be thought about when trying to cultivate placemaking for women in a neighborhood like Greater Englewood. You have to consider a lot of the other elements that have prevented those things from happening. But despite all of that, there are some examples of great placemaking for youth and young women and women in general. There's a lot of organizations that host initiatives for women and young women, and they are actually in need of other ways in which they can fulfill their goals of providing not only services, but safe spaces for women. So I would just say, talk to them, because they know exactly what they need. The problem is access to people who can help them create that. But there is definitely no, there's definitely no lack of ideas and opportunities for community plans on how to create safe spaces for women and youth in Greater Englewood. It's really just the resources and the people that can help make it happen. That's where the lack is.
I just want to add quickly to that, because I think about this all the time, and I want to emphasize, especially with students, how do you frame your research, right? You're talking about research, like talking to people is research. It's qualitative research, it's sociology, and how do you make your research actionable? So it's actually leading you to design something. The other thing I would say is that women are multitaskers big time. So if you want to understand the day in a life of a woman, just ask them their schedule. You'll see that they accommodate so many things. Like it's going to be interesting and crazy as part of that interview process. Just ask them what is the day in the life, and how does that look like, and like how much space they make for actually like leisure or recreation. It's oftentimes not for them, but for other family members, or they're always just kind of caring in general for additional items in their schedules. That is insane. And mapping that'll be super interesting to see, because what I'm going to is maybe your project is not only about spatial aspects, but it could be programmatic. Like, how do you actually match the need, the lifestyle, the activities, instead of creating one more thing to go to, one more thing to be, caring about? Like, can you just create something that supports what is already happening in their lives? So I think just speaks to what Tonika just said, but I'm always thinking, like, how do you organize it from a research framework perspective? And how you generate new information out of these interviews and conversations?
I will say one thing very quickly. Every space that we are in is almost always affected by traffic violence and speeds of cars, and how that affects, how women move around, and their children, and then children's ability to walk to school and all that. So I think slowing traffic, making things more walkable has really important benefits, especially for women as caregivers and for families.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our panelists for really bringing a very thought-provoking conversation centered around equity. And yeah, like I'm going to echo what Michaela said in the chat for providing really great answers to everything. Very inspiring. I feel like you inspired the students, activists, and planners in this audience. So I just want to thank you all so much for your time and for participating in this year's WPPA panel. So thank you all so much. Now for the audience, if you would like to stick around, please, for SBUP's panel at 1:30, Building a Solidarity Economy. I think we are going to take a break until 1:30, so we will meet you all back then. But thank you all so much.
And go follow Paola and I on Instagram. We share updates about our projects.
We're dropping the links.
You're good at that.